The Sunday school lessons for March 23rd, 2025 are offering a sweet aroma to God and up in smoke. Leviticus chapter 1, verses 3 through 17. Welcome, viewers and subscribers, to my channel, Read With Me. I am Audrey. If you are new here, please know that this is an audio reading of the lesson with intermittent commentary. Please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel to help me reach the masses and to also help me walk in my path and in my purpose. Thank you so much for all that you do to help this channel grow one viewer and one subscriber at a time. Verse 3. If the offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you are to offer a male without defect. You must present it at the entrance to the tent of meeting so that it will be acceptable to the Lord. In the verse just before this one, the Lord permitted that animal sacrifices could come from either a person's herd of cattle or flock of sheep and goats. The verse before us narrows the focus specifically to that of a burnt offering that comes from the herd. The directive to sacrifice only animals without defect is repeated in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 21. This command reflects a key distinction between profane and sacred things. It also emphasizes that God deserves the best of one's herd rather than the worst. Leviticus 22, verses 17 through 33, gives an extended warning against unacceptable sacrifices. Centuries later, the prophet Malachi would charge God's people with violating this prohibition. The added specification that the blemish-free sacrifice be male foreshadows the sacrifice of Jesus. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 14, and 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 19. The burnt offering could not be presented just anywhere the giver desired. The worshiper had to bring it to the place specifically designated for such a sacred purpose, the tabernacle. Only then would the sacrifice be considered acceptable to the Lord, what conforms to his requirements and what pleases him. The Lord was to be worshiped on his terms and at the sole place designated for that purpose. He instituted strict penalties for performing sacrifices in any other location. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 11 through 14 reiterates the necessity of a centralized worship site, anticipating the future temple in Jerusalem. This requirement forced the Israelites to worship the Lord alone in a consistent way and prevented them from continuing their practices of sacrificing to goat idols. Verse 4. You are to lay your hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on your behalf to make atonement for you. As the reader works through the procedure specified for the various types of sacrifices, several similarities are seen. The first is the instruction to put a hand on the head of the burnt offering. This is the first of a multi-step procedure. The placement of the hand symbolizes the person's submission of the animal as a sacrifice on the person's behalf. Verse 5. You are to slaughter the young bull before the Lord, and then Aaron's sons, the priests, shall bring the blood and splash it against the sides of the altar at the entrance to the tent of meeting. As the procedure continues to the following steps, we may wonder who did the hands-on work to slaughter the young bull. The context implies that it was the one who had brought the animal to be sacrificed. After that, Aaron's sons, the priests, ordained in Exodus 29 and Leviticus 8, took over to perform the rest of the task regarding blood. But Leviticus chapter 14, verses 19 through 20, mentions a priest who was to slaughter the animal. In any case, a priest had to be present to officiate. The use of blood, as described, functions as a mechanism of purification. It reinforced the principle of atonement, since, as the Lord later declared, the life of a creature is in the blood. And I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar. It is the blood of that makes atonement for one's life. Leviticus chapter 17, verse 11. Verses 6 through 7. Verse 6. You are to skin the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. The next step was the removal of the animal's hide. This might be either prior to or simultaneously with cutting the carcass into pieces. Both would speed up the burning process. Leviticus chapter 7, verse 8 directed that the priest officiating at the burnt offering should receive the animal's hide. Verse 7. The sons of Aaron, the priest, are to put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. Only priests were allowed to carry out the act of sacrificing the animal prepared for the burnt offering. The phrase, put fire on the altar, does not mean to start the fire, because the fire for this altar was to burn continuously. Leviticus chapter 6, verses 9 through 13, Numbers chapter 28, verses 1 through 8. The idea instead is to stoke the fire. Verse 8. Then Aaron's sons, the priests, shall arrange the pieces, including the head and the fat, on the wood that is burning on the altar. Exodus chapter 29, verse 13, and Leviticus chapter 8, verse 20. And also Leviticus chapter 9, verse 13 specified the pieces in greater detail. Verse 9. You are to wash the internal organs and the legs with water, and the priest is to burn all of it on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. This verse concludes the description of the ritual that began in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 4. The resultant smoke that creates an aroma pleasing to the Lord attributes a human characteristic, a sense of smell, to God. This is anthropomorphic language. Even though God is a spirit, the scriptures speak of him as having physical characteristics. Here, the sense of smell depicts how the Lord was pleased with the burnt offering as presented in the manner set forth in the text. To summarize, the ritual involved these steps 1 through 10. 1. Place hand on the animal's head. 2. Slay the animal. 3. Splash animal blood against the sides of the altar. 4. Remove the hide from the carcass. 5. Dismember the carcass. 6. Stoke the altar fire. 7. Arrange wood on the altar. 8. Arrange body pieces and fat on the altar fire. 9. Wash internal organs and legs. 10. Burn all except hide to create smoke pleasing to the Lord. Verse 10. If the offering is a burnt offering from the flock, from either the sheep or the goats, you are to offer a male without defect. For this kind of offering, sheep or goats that were made male without defect were interchangeable with young bull just discussed. We see male goats and sheep themselves as interchangeable for Passover in Exodus chapter 12, verse 5. Either goats or sheep were acceptable for fellowship offerings, with either male or female allowed, Leviticus 3. Either bulls, male or female goats, or female lambs are allowed for sin or trespass offerings, depending on the nature of the sin. Verse 11. You are to slaughter it at the north side of the altar before the Lord, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall splash its blood against the sides of the altar. Here, a specific instruction was given as to where the animal was to be slain, at the north side of the altar. Why this was required is not entirely clear, although it may have something to do with the fact that the tabernacle and the gateway into its courtyard faced east, Numbers 2 and 3, and Numbers 3 and 38. This rationale may also combine in some way with a need to distinguish this offering from the one taken from the herd. Other than that, the procedure at this point is the same. Verse 12. You are to cut it into pieces, and the priest shall arrange them, including the head and the fat, on the wood that is burning on the altar. Again, the procedure is the same as that designated for the bovines. Leviticus chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. Verse 13. You are to wash the internal organs and the legs with water, and the priest is to bring all of them and burn them on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. Yet again, the procedure is the same as was with the bull. Leviticus chapter 1, verse 9. Verse 14. If the offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, you are to offer a dove or a young pigeon. This option for a burnt offering was provided for people who could not afford to bring the aforementioned offerings from a herd or flock. Leviticus chapter 5 verses 5 through 7 through 10. Such an option was also provided for women after childbirth who could not afford to offer a lamb for the burnt offering of purification, 12 and 8. One may recall the sacrifice that Joseph and Mary offered following the birth of Jesus, Luke chapter 2, verse 24. Verse 15. The priest shall bring it to the altar, wring off the head, and burn it on the altar. Its blood shall be drained out on the side of the altar. The procedure for offering a bird as a burnt offering differed from that prescribed for offerings from the herd or the flock. Whereas the blood of the animals that were sacrificed was sprinkled around the altar of burnt offering, the bird's blood was to be drained out on the side of the altar. Though the bird's blood would not be nearly as abundant as that of the other animals, the need to separate its blood from its body must be completed. Israelites were forbidden to eat blood. Verses 16 through 17. Verse 16. He is to remove the crop and the feathers and throw them down east of the altar where the ashes are. The meaning of a bird's crop is uncertain. It may refer to the pouch near the gullet or throat, the craw, where the bird stores food temporarily before digestion. Another option is that it may refer to the lower intestines. Its removal may be compared to removing the intestines from the animals of the herd or the flock. The place of ashes that was beside the altar seems to have been a temporary location for ashes. The ultimate destination for that refuge was outside the camp. Leviticus chapter 4, verse 12. Verse 17. He shall tear it open by the wings, not dividing it completely, and then the priest shall burn it on the wood that is burning on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. Further instructions regarding the sacrifices of birds conclude this portion of our text. The anatomy of a bird is quite different from that of a sheep, goats, and bovines. Thus, the sacrificial procedure was quite different. The priest was solely responsible for preparing and presenting the bird as a burnt offering. Though not as monetarily valuable as something offered from the flock or the herd, this offering still produced an aroma pleasing to the Lord. Whether the worshiper was well to do or impoverished made no difference to the Lord, who treats everyone alike. Acts chapter 10, verse 34, Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 17. As followers of Jesus, our duty is to offer to God not burnt sacrifices of animals or birds, but our lives as a living sacrifice. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Our sacrifices do include the monetary. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 16. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 3 through 4. Philippians chapter 4, verse 18. But are primarily spiritual, consisting of the fruit of lips, offering our thanks to God, and the good deeds we do as salt and light in our spheres of influence. Thank you so very much for listening. Join me soon for the next audio reading of the Sunday School lesson with intermittent commentary.